Chapter 5 of the Bird Study Book. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Bird Study Book by T. Gilbert Pearson. Chapter 5 The Birds in Winter. With the approach of winter, the country loses its charm for many people. The blossoms and verdure, so common yet so beloved by all, have departed, and only the brown expanses of dead grass and weeds relieve the blackness of the forest trees. Even ardent nature lovers have been known to forsake their walks at this season, when the songs of the birds have ceased, and the forest boughs give forth only sobs and shrieks as they sway to the strength of the north winds. A good time for field walks. Nevertheless, winter is a good time for the bird student to go afield. If the wild life is less abundant, so is the human life, and you have the country almost to yourself. If you but say in your heart, "I will go and see what may be found," you will later rejoice, for with the falling of the leaves many of Nature's secrets, which she has jealously guarded through the summer months, stand revealed. Among the naked branches of the briars you may find the catbird's nests, which defied all search last June. It will be a comfort to learn that the bird really did have a nest just about the place you thought it was located. Many other pleasing surprises await you in the winter woods. The Downy's Winter Quarters. One late autumn day I stopped to watch a junco feeding among some weed stalks near a hillside trail. After remaining motionless for a minute or two, I became conscious of a light muffled tapping somewhere near by. It did not take long to locate the sound. On the underside of a slanted, decayed limb, 20 feet above, was a new, well-rounded hole, perhaps an inch in diameter. Even as I looked, the occupant came to the entrance and threw out a billful of small chips. When these fell, I saw that the dead leaves on the earth beneath had been well sprinkled by previous ejections of the same nature. I had discovered a downy woodpecker at work on his winter bedroom, and later I had reason to believe that he made this his nightly retreat during the cold months that followed. Chancing to pass this way one dark cloudy morning, it occurred to me to look and see if he had yet left his bed. Striking the limb near the hole, I was rewarded by seeing a little black and white head poked out inquiringly. Fearing he might be resentful if such treatment were repeated, I never afterward disturbed my little neighbor while he was taking his morning nap. But I had learned this much, that one downy at least sometimes liked to be abed on cold mornings. Perhaps he knew that there was no early worm about at this season. Birds and the night. It may be that others of our winter birds also make excavations for sleeping quarters. The chickadee and nuthatch very probably do so, although I have never found them thus engaged. It is well known that many small birds creep into holes to pass the night. Old nesting places of woodpeckers are thus again rendered useful, and many of the natural cavities of trees contain, during the hours of darkness, the little warm pulsating bodies of birds. Quails invariably roost on the ground regardless of the time of year or the prevailing weather conditions. An entire covey numbering sometimes 12 or 15 will settle for the night in a compact circular group with heads pointed outward. When a heavy snow falls they are completely buried, and then if a hard crust forms before morning their roosting place becomes their tomb. Grouse now and then are trapped in the same way, but their superior strength enables them to break through and escape. In fact, these larger birds often deliberately go to roost beneath the snow, breaking through the crust by a swift plunging dive from the air. Bearing these facts in mind, it is easy to understand why quails often become scarce in a country where grouse abound. Small birds pass the winter nights in evergreens, thick-growing vines, under the eaves of verandas, or on the rafters of bridges. Many creep into cracks of outhouses. I have found them at night in caves, barns, and once in a covered wagon. Almost any available shelter may have its bird tenant on cold nights, who, if undisturbed, will often return again and again to the refuge it has once found safe and comfortable. Birds that pass the winter in the northern states are subjected to many hardships. In fact, the fatalities in the bird world in winter are so great, and the population so constantly reduced by one form of tragedy or another, that it is only the stronger and more fortunate individuals of a species that survive to enjoy the summer. The food question in winter. Where to secure the food is the big question which confronts every bird when it opens its eyes on the first snowy morning of winter. Not only has the whole aspect of the country been changed, but the old sources of food have passed away. Not a caterpillar is to be found on the dead leaves, and not a winged insect is left to come flying by, hence other food must be looked for in new directions. Emboldened by hunger, the starlings alight at the kitchen door, and the juncos, sparrows, downy woodpeckers, and nuthatches come to feed on the window sill. Jays and meadowlarks haunt the manure piles or haystacks in search of fragments of grain. Purple finches flock to the wahoo elm trees to feed on the buds, and crossbills attack the pine cones. Even the wary ruffed grouse will leave the shelter of the barren woods, and the farmer finds her in the morning sitting among the branches of his apple tree, relieving the twigs of their buds. In every field a multitude of weed stalks and stout grass stems are holding their heads above the snow, tightly clasping their store of seeds, until members of the sparrow family shall thrash them out against the frozen crust beneath. Among those which are forced to become largely vegetarian in winter is the bluebird. In summer he is passionately fond of grasshoppers, cutworms, and Arctia caterpillars, but now he wanders sadly over the country of his winter range in quest of the few berries to be found in the swamps and along the hedgerows. The crow is another bird often met in winter walks, for he, too, in many cases spurns the popular movement southward in the fall, and severe indeed must be the weather before he forsakes his former haunts. You will find him feeding along the banks of streams, or in the open spots in the fields, or again in the woods pecking rotten stumps or fallen limbs in search of dormant beetles. 55 species of warblers inhabit North America. These birds are insectivorous in their feeding habits, which of course also means that they are migratory. A partial exception to the rule is found in the common myrtle warbler. Although in winter these birds range south to Panama, many remain as far north as New Jersey, Kansas, and the Ohio Valley. This does not mean that insects are found in these regions in sufficient numbers to supply the larder of the myrtle warblers, but it does mean that they find acceptable substitutes for their usual food. Oddly enough, what they depend on is not animal matter in any form, but consists of berries which contain some of the essential food properties of fatty meats. One of the most popular with them is the common bayberry. Among the sand dunes of the extensive banks along the North Carolina coast there grows in great profusion a small bushy tree known as the yaupon. The young leaves of this, when dried and steeped, make a very acceptable drink, and during the hungry days of the Civil War, when the Federal blockade became effective, the people of the region used this as a substitute for tea and coffee. The yaupon produces in great abundance a berry that is so highly esteemed by the myrtle warblers that they pass the winter in these regions in numbers almost incredible. When the food supply fails. It is hard to realize the extent of havoc wrought among the birds by cold, snowy weather. Early in the year 1895 a long, severe cold spell, accompanied by snow and sleet, almost exterminated the bluebird in the eastern United States. The bodies of no less than 24 of these birds were found in the cavity of one tree. It looked as if they had crowded together with the hope of keeping warm. It was not the cold alone which had destroyed the birds. A famine had preceded the cold snap, and the birds, weakened by hunger, were ill prepared to withstand its rigors. One winter some years ago a prolonged freezing wave swept over our South Atlantic states and played havoc with the woodcock in South Carolina. This is what happened. The swamps in the upper reaches of the Pee the Black, and the Waccamaw rivers were frozen solid, and the woodcock, that in winter abound in this region, were thus driven to the softer grounds farther downstream. The cold continued, and the frozen area followed the birds. The woodcock, unable to drive their long bills into the once responsive mud, were forced to continue their flight toward the coast in search of open ground where worms could be found. When at length they reached Winyaw Bay, where these rivers converge, they were at the point of exhaustion. Thousands of the emaciated birds swarmed in the streets and gardens of Georgetown. They were too weak to fly, and negroes killed them with sticks and offered baskets of these wasted bodies, now worthless as food, for a few cents a dozen. Several shipments were made to northern cities by local marketmen, who hoped to realize something by their industry. Of the wild ducks which remain north in the winter, many die because of the freezing of the water in which they must dive or dabble for their food. On the morning of February 11, 1912, Cayuga Lake in western New York State was found to be covered with a solid sheet of ice from end to end. It is a large body of water, having an area of nearly 60